Welcome back. Okay, let's talk about the basic sewing machine parts, and also we'll just talk about some features that are nice to have, but they're not really the basics. So let me just start with those real quick in case you're looking still at buying a machine. So some of the features that are nice to have, but you don't have to have, would be a machine that has a longer throat. That's this area right here. So if it has a wider area, more room in here, especially if you're quilting, you can fit more fabric in there. So you might want one that's got some bigger space in there. Again, not something you have to have, just something to think about. A lot of machines, some of the newer ones will have a button that's for like a needle up and down feature, and you'll press the button once and the needle will go down. Press it again, the needle will go up. So that can be something that people like when they just want to move it up and down instead of having to use a hand wheel. A lot of machines will have an automatic buttonholer. That's great if you want to be doing clothes and buttonholes and things like that. If you're going to be working with knits, you want to make sure that your machine is capable of doing a double needle. So it should have two needle spool pins, and it should be able to have a double needle. So if you're going to be working with knits, that's a really nice thing to have. Now again, you don't have to have it. You can use a zigzag stitch. But if you have big plans for making clothing, it'll make your clothing look more professional. A lot of people like to have a needle threader, which is just a little thing that comes down here and it automatically threads your needle. You wrap the thread around it and it threads it through the eye of the needle for you. Again, some people like to have that. That could be something you want to look into. Top loading bobbin or drop-in bobbin is where you can see the bobbin up here while you're sewing, and you can actually see when the bobbin thread is running out. The other type are front loading, so the bobbin will be back here behind this case and you can't actually see when your thread's going to run out. So it's nice to have a top loading drop-in bobbin. It's also nice to have a machine that has lots of different presser feet if you're going to be wanting to do things like zipper foot or doing a lot of piping or buttonholes, things like that. There's also machines that have a button somewhere around here that will automatically cut your thread, so an automatic thread cutter. Every machine will have some kind of little notch over here where you can pull your thread and cut it, but it's nice to have one where you just click a button and the thread gets cut for you. Again, automatic pressure foot adjustment. So some machines, if they're really fancy, will adjust the pressure foot depending on how thick of fabric you have underneath there, and it helps keep it from jamming the thread. Now that's usually found in higher end machines. And then lastly, you might want to look for a free arm. Free arm means that this piece pops off and you're left with a skinnier, more narrow spot right here, so you can slide a sleeve or something over here and sew around it more in a curve. So again, not something you have to have, but it can help you. Okay, so now let's go into the basic sewing machine parts, so you get to know your sewing machine. Now again, all sewing machines are different, so you need to look at your manual and find these parts on your specific machine using your manual. But I'll go through and talk about the different parts that you should know about on your machine. Here we go. Okay, so every sewing machine will have an on and off switch somewhere, and it will have a spot to plug in your power cord and your presser foot cord. Okay, these will usually be on the side of the machine, or sorry, not your presser foot, your foot pedal cord. And they'll usually be on the side or the back of your machine. Okay, here's your foot pedal. All machines will have a foot pedal. This usually plugs in next to your power plug, and the foot pedal goes on the floor, so you can use your foot to press down on here, and that makes the motor start moving and the needle go up and down. The harder you press, the faster the needle will go. Here's the plug where you plug it into your sewing machine. Next, you will find a hand wheel or a flywheel. Okay, this is usually found on the right side of the machine, and it's usually the largest wheel or knob that you will find on your machine. You turn this to manually move the needle up and down, and you always turn it toward you. You never want to turn it away from you, that can screw up your machine. So when you're using the hand wheel trying to move your needle up and down, you always turn it toward you. Next, see if you can find a bobbin winder. Now, this is usually found on the top of the machine, sometimes the top back, and it's where you'll put the bobbin when you're threading and filling a bobbin. So, you'll put the little bobbin here. On this particular machine, you've got your spool of thread, and it will wind around here, and this usually will, you probably pop that over to there, and this will stop it when the bobbin gets full. So you'll find a few little different parts that have a bobbin winder spindle and the stopper and a spool pin and probably a thread guide or two to wind your bobbin. Again, you'll have to look at your manual because your machine's going to be different. All machines are slightly different, but most of them have something similar to this. Next up is your thread guide. So it's any place that you guide your thread, just like it sounds. So here's a thread guide where you're going to put your thread through. You can see that there's an image here actually telling you where the thread goes on this machine. So it goes through some different thread guides and down and around. Again, look at your manual to find your thread guides. Another thing, this can be sticking out like this, or it might be hidden within the casing of your machine, but this is the take-up lever. And when you're threading, you have to make sure that the thread gets through your take-up lever. This is located directly above the presser foot and needle of your sewing machine. And it's the part that pulls the thread from the spool and feeds it through the machine, and then it lifts the thread back and forth out of the cloth to make a stitch. So that's your take-up lever. And the next thing you want to find is your tension control. It's usually some kind of dial or knob like this where you will manually change the number, higher or lower. It'll have a few different numbers to adjust the tension. So on a mechanical machine, it'll be a dial. On a computerized machine, it's probably a button within your system for changing the setting. And that adjusts the tension for the upper thread to make it tighter or looser. Okay, also on your machine, you're going to have some sort of stitch selector and a length adjuster. So this particular machine gives you A, B, C, so that you'd have to look in your manual or go over here. It usually say somewhere on the front what each stitch is. So in this case, stitch A looks like it's just a basic straight stitch. So if you want to do a basic straight stitch, you turn your knob to A. Then this is the length of your stitches. So if you generally put it on a 2.5 millimeters, that's an average stitch length. The higher you go, you get a longer stitch length. It's more for things like basting. So this knob adjusts your stitch length, and this one will select the type of stitch that you want to do. So in an electronic machine, it's probably buttons, and on a manual machine, it's probably knobs. Okay, next, your needle. You need to find where your needle is on your machine. It should be fairly obvious, but if you've never sewn before, make sure you know where your needle is. Your upper thread is threaded through the needle as you sew, and the needle moves up and down, and it catches the bobbin thread underneath and pulls it up and creates a stitch. So there's different sizes and different types and different purposes for each needle. And we'll get into that in more detail later, but you will need needles for sewing. There are also different presser feet. Now, this is a universal or zigzag presser foot. It's got a larger opening here so that the needle can move back and forth without hitting the side of this metal presser foot. The presser foot holds the fabric flat as it's fed through the machine. And underneath the presser foot, you'll find something called feed dogs, and that provides traction to the fabric. So the presser foot and the feed dogs is what brings the fabric through as you sew, so that all you have to do is just gently glide with your hand. Now, there's lots of different presser feet, different purposes. We'll go over that later, but you're going to want one that looks like this. This is like a universal presser foot. And next up, you need to find your presser foot lever. This is generally on the side near your presser foot and the needle and all that, or toward maybe on the back. The presser foot lever raises or lowers this presser foot. And you'll raise the presser foot in order to insert fabric, but then you have to lower the presser foot before you begin stitching, because that's what holds the fabric in place. Some higher end machines will do this automatically, and they'll have a built-in feature that the machine won't even run unless the presser foot is lowered. So it depends on your machine, but you should find some kind of lever near the side or the back. Okay, next, talked about the feed dogs. The feed dogs are located under the pressure foot. So you see them here. These are like these tooth type looking things. So they go under the throat plate and they come up from under the throat plate and they move the fabric along as you sew. They gently grip the bottom of the fabric and pass it through as you sew. Some machines have the ability to raise and lower the feed dogs. So if you wanted to do freehand quilting, you can lower these and they go down under, and then you have to push the fabric through a little bit more manually. Needle plate. This is right under your presser foot and it covers up your feed dogs and your bobbin. It's a removable metal shield and it covers up your bobbin area, and it's held in place by some screws and usually includes a smaller inset plate that can be removed to access your bobbin area. So if you have a drop-in bobbin, it's really nice to have because, like I said, you can see your bobbin right in here. So this has a real smooth surface, so your fabric just glides over it, and you can usually see measurements on the sides for your seam allowance. So these here, if you were wanting to sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, you would line your fabric up to this 3/8 inch edge and sew straight along, and that keeps your seams nice and straight. So a lot of them will have these numbers engraved on them for seam allowance. Now you have your bobbin or your bobbin case. The bobbin is a small spool of thread that provides the thread for the underside of a stitch. The bobbin case is gently and securely holds a bobbin so that the machine can run and unravel the thread without jamming and jarring movements. So it has to hold it in place so it doesn't shake all about. And like I said, it'll be in drop-in form, or you could find it in the front of your machine. And the bobbin case provides the correct tension for the thread on the bobbin, so it enables a uniform and balanced stitch. So you'll see the thread comes out through here, and in here is a tension disc, just like above on the upper part of your machine. There's a tension disc down here where you would thread your bobbin thread through, and that keeps the tension correct for the bottom of your bobbin. Now, this is for a drop-in bobbin. A front-loading bobbin will have a different type of bobbin case, and it looks like I'm missing my photo, so let's add that in there real quick. Sorry guys, technical difficulties. Okay, so here is what a front-loading bobbin will look like, and this is the bobbin case for a front-loading machine. You would pull this out, and the bobbin would get set inside here, and then you would put that back in this larger area and click it into place. You can see they look a little bit different. Again, you've got to refer to your manual to figure out how your machine works. Next up is the reverse or backstitch button or lever. So just like it sounds, when you press it, it reverses your stitching and sends your fabric in the opposite way through the machine, and so it stitches backwards. You use this when you start and end a stitch in order to secure it and to prevent it from unraveling, and so every machine will have a reverse or backstitch button or lever. You need to find that on your machine. You'll use it every time you sew. And lastly, a thread cutter. Most machines should have some kind of thread cutter. Now, if you have a really, really old machine, like a really old vintage Singer, it might not have this, but any of the newer machines will have some sort of thread cutter either on the side or up on their back. And you just pull the thread through, and there's a little blade in there, and it just snips your thread for you. Alright, so those are parts of the sewing machine that you need to know. And if you're unfamiliar with your own sewing machine, please use this time to review your owner's manual. If you don't have an owner's manual, try looking online. You can try Googling your sewing machine make and model and see if there's a copy of a manual online that you can download. Or possibly sometimes you can search your specific machine on YouTube and see if there's a video walkthrough for your specific machine. But you've got to make sure that you know what type of needles your machine uses, what type of bobbins. You've got to find the different things that I just showed you for the parts of your sewing machine. And you've got to know for your specific machine because there's so many different machines and they're all slightly different. So you've got to be able to refer to your manual. Okay, so we talked about sewing machines. Now let's move on to the next lesson, which will be other supplies that you need as a beginner sewer.